So once again, please take your seats. We'll go ahead and get started. We have our panel here in place for the second panel session. I won't go through the lengthy introduction to John Firth, because you saw him in action this morning. This panel is changing the focus from the government side to the commercial side, and the commercial in the overall breadth of activities that we have. So I will, with no further ado, turn it over to John to take it from here. Thank you, John.
Well, thank you very much, Stephen, and I hope you've all enjoyed your lunch. We've got a different panel here, but I think it's really important we don't think that somehow the private sector and the public sector are in parallel universes that never meet. You heard Anne this morning on the panel talk about public-private partnerships, and all of these organisations and bodies that are represented here and these businesses, they all work with the public sector. The public sector relies on the private sector to deliver most of goods and services. And there's an interconnection there. So when we think about closing the gap between providers and users, we have to remember users is not just a very simple homogeneous term. It's quite a complex community and network in its own right. So we just say slightly change the emphasis here and think about the private sector and begin to think about how does this sector with the organisation represented here, how do they use Earth observation and data generally to assess and manage risks, identify opportunities. Not just about risk, it's also about opportunities. How do they take business decisions? And also actually how do they manage and operate their business and also those of their customers. So without further ado, I'm going to start introducing the panel. And I'm going to start with Frank Nutter on my left-hand side. Frank is the president of the Reinsurance Association of America. Perhaps some of you don't know what reinsurance is, and perhaps Frank will pick that up. He also serves on the board of the advisory board of the OECD's International Network for Financial Management of Large-Scale Disasters. So Frank has a big international area, and the RAND Centre of Catastrophic Risk Management and Compensation. Frank has a very distinguished career and background in insurance and also thinking about risk issues, highway safety, workers' compensation. And I believe also you have a law degree as well, so it comes from a multitude of backgrounds there. Next to Frank, and I'm just turning up my notes here, is Kenji Wakamatsu is the director of Earth Observation Business in a company called NTT Data from Japan. He's based in Tokyo. He's participated in many projects related not just to remote sensing, but also on GIS, sensor networks, using tools for disaster risk management, asset management within businesses, and that's incredibly important. He's also experienced in doing a lot of work with overseas development aid projects around the world using those sorts of skills. He previously worked for the Japanese Cabinet Satellite Intelligence Center in Tokyo as well, and has had a lot of experience developing ground stations and particularly matching IT services with user requirements. So, a bridging the gap experience there. Next to Kenji is, sorry, I'm just getting my notes, Jack Dangermond. Jack is founder and president of Esri, which is the world's leading organization in terms of GIS. Jack's a landscape architect by training, so it's interesting how he's... yeah, obviously had a long journey to get from landscape architecture to where you are now, Jack. Founded the business in 1969 with a vision, and this is really important, a vision, because when we talk about using Earth observation data, we're actually talking about visions of what we can use it for. He had a vision that computer mapping analysis could help us design a better future. Under his leadership, that vision has continued within guiding Esri and creating cutting-edge GIS and geo-design technologies, which are used in every industry across the world and in every public sector organisation as well. So there's a public-private relationship there. Next to Jack is Jon Davis. Jon is a chief meteorologist at a company called Riskpulse. Oh, sorry, that's my notes there. Hang on. Technology will fail. It's back here. Which is Riskpulse is a consulting business, particularly helping other businesses think about their operations, energy, agriculture, and supply chain logistics. He brings over 30 years of experience and widely considered one of the foremost experts on the impact of weather and climate on global commodities. And commodities trading, for those of you who don't know, is an extremely profitable business if you have the right data and the right analysis, and that's where Jon comes in. He has a degree in meteorology, spent 18 years on Wall Street working with Citigroup, and was their chief meteorologist. So perhaps not everybody realizes banks employ meteorologists. And you ask why, it's about understanding risk. He spent a lot of time in the energy sector as well, thinking about monitoring global climate, weather and climate impact on energy and also on agriculture. And then finally, and a great welcome to Brad Wooldridge from Australia. Brad's a farmer. And you might think, well, why is a farmer here on this panel talking about Earth observation data? And Brad has some really interesting real-life business decisions he's made that enable him to grow his business. He and his wife are mixed farmers in Western Australia. They run a 2,500 head of sheep. They crop barley, lupins, canola, and oats, so it's a mixed farm. In 2000, he and his wife, his company, began using land-gate satellite remote sensing to measure pasture growth and production, because, as Frank and I were talking before, when you're in the livestock business, actually your business is growing grass. And the more you understand how to grow good grass, the better your business is. But what he did was actually developed his own systems analysis with management, benchmarking, and productivity through analysis of remote sensing imagery data. So it really is an example of taking Earth observation data and taking it somewhere else that perhaps was never actually imagined. So we're going to rely a lot on Brad coming up with those real on-the-ground examples of using Earth observation data and how it's been helpful to him to improve his business. So I'm going to stop there. I'm going to just ask each of them just to say a few words and just about some of the things they think are important, and then we'll head off into the questions. So I'm going to start with you, Frank.
Well, thank you, and thanks for the opportunity to be here. I am reminded that this is a challenging time on the program, meaning after lunch, and I'm going to exacerbate the problem by describing for you the business model of insurance. So hopefully the rest of the panelists can help keep you awake. The insurance industry's financial success or not is wholly dependent upon weather and climate. So let me just give you a couple of data points, all of which are U.S.-based natural disasters, weather-related, that occurred since September. The wildfires in California are estimated to have $4 to $6 billion of insured losses. You can probably double that in terms of economic loss. Hurricane Harvey, the estimates are between $19 billion and $35 billion of insured loss. The National Flood Insurance Program, for those of you here in the U.S., estimated their losses at $11 billion. The automobile loss from that storm alone is in the $3 to $5 billion range, and the uninsured loss is estimated at $65 to $90 billion. Hurricane Irma, the estimates from the industry they range actually pretty dramatically from $25 billion to $35 billion of insured losses. The uninsured loss is probably twice or maybe 3 times that. And Maria is the one that the insurance industry is having its most difficult time getting its arms around, and the estimates range from $15 to $85 billion of insured losses. And again, you can probably double that for the uninsured losses. The Maria losses are probably more in the $45 billion range. And again, if you're focused on taxpayer obligations, the Senate and House just approved another $36.5 billion of disaster assistance on top of the $15 billion of disaster assistance approved in September, so $52 billion of disaster assistance. So not only is the insurance industry very dependent upon climate and weather, but obviously the government and its financial obligations related to disaster recovery. The insurance industry is a science-based industry, but the science that is the core of the insurance model is the actuarial science. And it's really a science based upon historical loss information. So think automobile losses, homeowners losses, workers' compensation. These are all highly documented, data-driven kinds of financial analysis, but they're historical. And what the industry found was that that's valuable, but frankly not terribly useful in a forward-looking industry trying to assess risk related to climate and weather, or certainly to price the risk. So what developed after Hurricane Andrew, but just after Hurricane Andrew, is the business model I wanted to describe briefly, and that is the development of catastrophe models. And the catastrophe models that the industry is pretty reliant upon across the globe, not just here in the US, really takes the core database that an insurance company has of its insured properties. Think Palm Beach County, Florida, or the Houston area. And these catastrophe models overlay science and data related to science on top of the industry's database or a company's database of homes to assess what the probability of certain losses will be going forward, as well as to try and assess what the pricing ought to be to make this profitable for the industry to ensure that. So the point that I wanted to make in my introductory comments is that the insurance industry is highly dependent on data sources, notably public data sources, and it uses it together with its actuarial business model to properly price and assess the risk. But I look forward to the questions to follow.
Thank you, Frank. Kenji, would you like to address the audience?
Thank you, John. I'm so happy to be here. My name is Kenji Wakamatsu. I'm in charge of Earth observation business of NTT Data. NTT Data is a global IT services company based in Japan. Our division has more than 20 years experience in EO business, focusing on value-added products and services. In 2014, NTT Data started providing digital elevation model service and became one of leading providers of global DEM dataset. It's called AW3D, Advanced World 3D. We have two important partners in this business. The first one is JAXA, Japan Space Agency. We have already finished making whole globe dataset with JAXA satellite called AROS. It is the world's first 5-meter resolution 3D map covering all global land spaces. The second one is Digital Globe. We have a strategic partnership to provide higher resolution products, which are 0.5 DEM and 3D vector building models. AW3D has been used in more than 70 countries and 400 different projects. The fields of usage are mapping, natural disaster, infrastructure construction, energy, natural resources, movie, game, and so on. In a lot of fields, AW3D has been used. Thank you.
Thank you, Kenji. Jack.
Yeah, thank you, John, and thank you for this opportunity. Franklin said that it's challenging after lunch. Isn't that what you said, Franklin?
Did you fall asleep already?
I didn't, really.
Okay. Okay.
So this is a time challenging to speak, but I would simply like to hinge off of that to comment. We're living in a challenging time. Wouldn't you agree? I mean, all the arrows seem to be going in the wrong direction. You read the newspaper, it looks like it's burning to read it, or the television news. So I'm really pleased to have just a small window to address you, because I think all of you from your different backgrounds here in this room are engaged in something. And I would guess I'd call it engaged in the creation, the literal digital transformation of the planet to one that is a digital twin of geographic reality. That really means a kind of geographic platform for managing and creating the future. I think it's worth just mentioning that this platform, we're all participating in it. So I'm thrilled to actually meet many of you for the first time, but also hear about your work, because although it's not very well organized yet at this point in history, what we can look forward to is a platform that I think will gradually move us from being at the effect of the circumstances to being the authoring of creating a better future. That's my sort of positive view of it. You're engineering, you're applying at different levels this digital twin to create cities, electricity, utilities, water, farming, all of it. And we're just at the very, very beginning of that. My work has, for the last 5 decades, been building tools that are used by people to do their existing work better. It has no such grand vision as what I mentioned. It helps engineers do their work a little better using geographic knowledge, or it helps planners do their work a little better, or engineers, or people that actually do real things. You know, do like Brad does, farm. You do real things. And right now, I have about 5 million customers. Isn't that amazing? If I, as a stupid landscape architect, had imagined that I would have 5 million customers, well, it's beyond my, even I get weirded out about it. They make about 2 billion maps a day just on the web. Think of the gravity of that. And most of those maps are about doing very practical things. Where do I dig? Where do I locate a Starbucks? Where do I locate a new store? Where do I set up conservation zones? Where do I monitor water? These are billions of little transactions or views that are cranked right into what practical people do. They're not the visionary thing of Earth observing. They're these little things, bottom up. So they call that a geographic information system. It's about applying geographic knowledge to real things. Okay, sometimes it's managing data, but usually it's right where the tip of the spear is changing the planet. So in the last few years, I've been working with some of you to wire in Earth observation into this platform so that as the Earth is changing, these millions of people who are doing real work are fed by that GIS concept. And I'm just one provider. There are many, actually. But the questions that, John, you originally challenged us with, what are the obstacles for getting Earth observation used? Some of it is pretty straightforward. It's connecting the data set, sometimes science, with these workflows of people doing real work. And I think this connecting of GIS people with the Earth observation community, your community, the community that you have birthed and created and managed, is so very important. So you asked me, John, what is the obstacle? Isn't that one of your questions that's going on? For me, it's not enough to just have open data. Open data is really important, and my colleague Hassan in Oman was sharing, we finally got our government to accept open data is okay. But open data is only the first step. The measurements, the content has to be made into services that are ready to use. In other words, decision ready or analytic ready or in my little world, GIS ready. That means dial tone into these millions of workers that are doing real work. It's like dial tone, simplified in such a way that they just drag and drop and mash up the data and do their work. To me, that's the big challenge for all of us, is to figure those little, Barb had that beautiful picture of the bridge and the gap in between. For me, it's, okay, yes, we definitely need open policies about Earth observation data, but also filling that gap right into the workflows of people. That's my only thought. John?
Okay, thank you very much, Jack. John? Yes.
Great, thanks, John. Some of Jack's comments were in the end users in getting the right information to the end user, and that is really the challenge. And it becomes a bigger challenge all the time with bigger data sets, with acceleration of data, with more specific things that the end user wants to do. And in my firm, really, it's the fundamental thing we do is, in the truest sense of the word, is applied meteorology and climate. And it's what I've always done. This is my 33rd year of doing this. It's changed quite a bit over the years, and it's always been driven by data, but of course, data has increased exponentially. And the challenge nowadays is to get the right data to the end users. So in our firm, we have 3 areas that we give information to and are clients of ours and get data to at very different levels. One is agricultural risk management. I mean, anything from groups of farmers to agribusiness firms to trading operations globally of all agricultural areas, livestock areas around the world. The second is energy risk management. And again, energy risk management is something that's been ongoing since really kind of started in the 70s and didn't really take off until the late 80s, early 90s with deregulation of natural gas in the US. And then that catapulted into the energy markets being more open. And again, it's getting data from a standpoint of the end users. Those two are kind of the more 2 traditional things: ag risk management, energy risk management. The new piece that we have got involved in, one of the reasons why we had a merger of 2 companies about 2.5 years ago, Riskpulse and Earthrisk, was supply chain logistics. And it really happened kind of as a circumstance. It was Feb of 15, incredibly cold across the central and eastern US, and we weren't doing much with supply chain logistics. Big beer companies came to us because they lost tens of millions of dollars of beer because it froze. It froze on trucks, it froze in cans, it froze in kegs, it froze all over the central and eastern US. And they said, management's really upset about this. Can you help us? We're like, well, sure, we can help you. And we like beer anyway, too. So that was really the beginning of supply chain logistics. And we said, yeah, we can look at that, and we can develop software and take data. And that was really the beginning of the back 2.5 years ago. And that is the portion of the business that has expanded. And that is where I think where the opportunity is. Supply chain logistics, trillions and trillions of dollars of movement of things. Things like corn, once it's harvested, things like end products, mayonnaise. I know a ton about mayonnaise after the last 2 years. One of our clients is a huge mayonnaise producer, very weather sensitive. And what do they want? They want the data. Is they're shipping their mayonnaise as to, do they put it in a refrigerated truck, which is very expensive, or do they put blankets on it, or does it go dry, nothing on the truck? Because if you get mayonnaise out of that temperature threshold from a forecasting standpoint, the mayonnaise is ruined and there's nothing left. And it goes on and on and on, from shipping to lane transportation to business continuity. But that's really where the big growth is right now. And again, the end user, they just want to know, what to put on their truck. They want to know, what the logistics are, whether it's river transportation, shipping, trucking, business continuity, how many of the individual stores are going to get winds of X and Y, when we had the hurricanes coming into the US this year, so they can plan ahead. this store is going to be closed 2 weeks or 4 weeks or 6 weeks or 3 months. That's what they want to know, and really a really neat, it's a challenging time, but it's a really neat challenge too. And it's a fascinating time to kind of be in the world of data analytics and then looking at, especially supply chain logistics. Ag is great and energy is great, but supply chain logistics, there's no question that is the big growth arena out there.
Okay, thank you. Brad.
Thanks, John. As John said, we farm in Western Australia. It's not the desert, as the Kiwis are telling me. It doesn't rain for 6 months, but we do get a growing season. And what's important for us is the amount of rain that we get in that growing season. Prior to 2006, we still are in a 450 millimetre rainfall zone, but we'd get 300 millimetres to 600 millimetres of rainfall. Since 2006, we've had 4 years sub 200 millimetres and a maximum of 500. And what that means is our climate limited amount of pasture we can grow is bottoms out at about 6 tonne if we're really good at it, and it'll top out at about 15 tonnes. And the number of livestock units we can run on that will range from about 3 to 15 livestock units. So what we have to be able to do is predict 6 months in advance how much biomass we're going to have by the end of October, so that we can adjust our livestock units. And we need to not get it wrong because it has big implications. It was very, very fortunate that we started in 2000 with satellite remote sensing. And the team came and included CSIRO. And what they said was, we could probably use a satellite and NDVI, because NDVI is the capacity of the plant to grow. And if we add the climate data to the capacity of the plant to grow, we can express the rate at which grass grows, which is a whole lot better than sitting there trying to measure it. Once we know that, we can also use the NDVI to measure the amount of biomass on the ground at any one time. So we now know how much there is, how much animals eat, and how fast it's growing. So we can calculate, are we accumulating or are we eating into that feed wedge? And then each week, as the PGR, pasture growth rate, goes along, we plot the accumulation of biomass. And we now have 17 years of that biomass. And remember, we have to predict 6 months in advance. The way we do that now is we look at what's our efficiency in terms of that climatic limited total dry matter production. Prior to this technology, we were running at about 30% water use efficiency. By management changes every week, we are now running at about 90% water use efficiency in terms of our pasture, and that's rain fed. So really important for the rest of the world as they need to increase or double the food production by 2050 that we get these sort of efficiencies. So what we do is when the season starts, we look at seasons that were similar rates of accumulated biomass. And we can narrow it down to plus or minus a tonne, less than plus or minus 1 stock unit 6 months in advance. So by the 1st of April, we can predict that by the middle of by the middle of October, we're going to run either a 6 tonne year, an 8 tonne or a 15 tonne year and change the stock units. And that's been really good and it's been really quite accurate. We've used this technology then. 5 years ago, nothing much was happening, so we tried to look for some uses for this. And we started to analyse different farms around the place remotely. And we'd pull people's farms apart without actually knowing who they were and look at their management systems. Now that was, well, it got a bit intrusive, so we stopped doing that because you could really tell how they farmed and what they needed to do. And so we stopped doing that. But then in 2015, we got a year that was really dry, and I said to my wife, we really need to find a farm that grows feed more regularly. So we used a state-based biomass image, a number of them. And this is an area for the southern half of Western Australia, an area twice the size of Texas. So quite a big area. And we used this data to find a strip of country where a sweet spot, where the pastures seem to grow all the time. And it was between 5 k's from the coast and not more than 10 k's. Not too hot, not too cold, just right, like 3 little bears. And so we found a property in there and rang the bank and I said, I'm going to put an offer on this property and we're going to do our due diligence by remote sensing. It's okay. They're a food and agri bank. They knew what we did and they okayed that. And we did our due diligence and went and bought it. And the interesting thing is, we're 2 years on now and the bank still haven't visited the property. They have access to the satellite data that we use. They're tracking what's happening. They're happy with the technology. Normally the bank manager would go onto that farm and assess it and value it. But yeah, they've really come on board with the technology. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks very much, Brad. And straight away you can see the great diversity of ways in which data is being used, and also how it really underpins these business models here. So we'll try and explore that a little bit more in some of the discussions. I am just going to pick back though to and I think Jack mentioned it as well about open access data, because it came up within Barbara's discussion this morning. It came up in the public sector, and there is this relationship between public and private, clearly. So I just want to ask again about open access data. How important is it to the business world generally and to your individual business areas? How important is it that we have access to open access data, particularly, for example, with Jack, to achieve your vision? So I'll just start with you, Jack. How critically important is this?
I like data, don't you? I mean, everybody likes data. And we use it in our personal lives. We use it all the time. From my perspective, there's no bad data. It's all good, even if it's sometimes not such high quality. So when the government produces data, I'm very strong in this belief that the taxpayers of that government paid for the data. And so it should be made openly, as long as it's not violating security or privacy, so that taxpayers don't have to pay for it twice. So that has been sort of the theme in this country, John, for a long time. As back in our Constitution, we simply said government data should be accessible and open and freely available. And that, for 200 and so many years, has really been the foundation of our Constitution. So in the geo space, topographic maps, census data, environmental data have all been made available freely with open data. And I think that policy has been winning the war around the world, in Japan, in France, in England even. All over the world, people are opening up their data and making it available for free, not for commercial reasons, and not keeping government data a secret. And that, I think, has transformed the way the world thinks about data. In imagery data, there's a lot of money spent on capturing all this imagery. And there has been the thought, can't we use cost recovery as a mechanism for getting back a long-term subsidy of information? And so far in the geo world, that sort of has not really proven true. It is a good model for commercial firms to be able to send up a satellite and charge for data. People seem to be willing to pay for that, but government data, no. It seems like, just as a general policy set, the world is on a charter to make government data open and freely available within those security and personal privacy issues. In terms of, does it make my business worthwhile? Well, my business is basically building tools, but my users who actually apply those tools are enriched, because in GIS, it's all about integrating multiple sources. It's not just my own data. It's, I'll get a soil map, I'll get an image map, I'll get a topographic map, and I'll pick out the best place to buy a farm. That's kind of what you did, isn't it? And that same integrated logic of integrated geographic analytics and decision making, I think, is our great hope, so that we put development in the place that's sustainable and not where it's not, so that we avoid the so-called half-Earth of the planet, which is we depend upon for biological, rejuvenation. And so if I look forward 50 years or 100 years, as we wire up the planet, it'll become a nervous system for us, guiding where and where not to act or what to do. And that's my hope, my prayer, actually. And we want to remove any obstacles that get in the way of that. And I think that means open data, number one. But my point is, open data is simply not enough. We have to, as authors of data, create information services that can be integrated so that the ability to combine and analyze knowledge and support businesses like John's or Kenji, everybody's business, having that open access to the nervous system of the planet where measurements are being made available in real time, that will require open data policies, but also a commitment to make data available as information products or information dial tone that can be immediately integrated and used. It's a long answer to your question.
Could
Yeah,
I
Frank.
comment on that? I said in the outset that the insurance industry is a data-dependent industry, largely because of the products use all this historical data. And then I said in weather and climate that it's forward-looking. The insurance sector is a significant user of data. The sector or insurance companies do not put up satellites. They do not have weather buoys. They do not have planes that fly into hurricanes or storms. They do not have the kind of tracking capability. It is entirely dependent upon public sources of data. And if there was an issue or problem, is any concerns that we all ought to have about adequate funding of programs with NASA and NOAA, we really ought to speak up, because at least in our sector, the sector is wholly dependent upon open source data and from the government.
Can I just to follow up that? Just explain what would happen if there was no open data and you couldn't provide insurance. What would that mean to the economy of a country?
Well, let me give you a practical example of all that, because there is a source of data that is restricted, if you will, from it's not open source data. And it will answer your question. The flood insurance, National Flood Insurance Program, provides residential flood coverage. The insurance industry has this budding interest in providing flood insurance and flood reinsurance, but the only real core source of data is the National Flood Insurance Program, and because of something Jack mentioned, for privacy considerations, they cannot and do not release data on individual properties that are insured or loss experience. So the insurance industry is reticent to get into that. So I think the answer, if you extrapolate my answer to the broader environment, that the insurance companies would have an enormous problem providing homeowners insurance or other forms of insurance in high-risk areas, coastal areas along rivers and other places subject to extreme weather events. It would be a real problem because the industry wouldn't really know what its loss experience was or what it could expect in the way of future conditions that would allow it to price the product.
And it's no coincidence that the growth in international trade in the 1700s in Europe and moving across the world was actually fueled and made it possible because of the growth of the insurance sector that went alongside it. It's one of those enablers, isn't it?
Well, it's true that, as you say, an enabler, the industry provides some financial security around commercial initiatives, including perhaps some of these. And without the source of data, without the information, it's going to have trouble providing a product and certainly pricing the product, which will ultimately drive companies not to do that.
John?
I think in your original question, the limiting of data would mean that X amount of end users would not get the information that they need. That's a consumer thing because prices would go up. It's also an item from a safety standpoint too. And so you have all those different issues, but the more you limit data, the less access that the end user has, because especially with the clients that we work with, they don't know anything about data. I mean, they don't know any of this exists. And so, they're busy on their jobs. They're doing ship planning and they're doing rail planning and they're worried about weights of what their trucks are. This is the last thing they're interested in until they have a big problem. And then when they have a big problem, it's expense to that company, which at the end of the day, yeah, it comes down to the consumers will pay. And others will pay from that standpoint. But limiting data, you get less information to the end users to make decisions.
Brad, I'm just going to ask you, I mean, when you started off using Earth observation data and satellite data, if somebody had said, yeah, it's all here, but this is how much it costs, would you have gone down that road or would you just moved on?
You know, when we were part of the pilot program for the first 5 years, and the data was free for us for the first 5 years, At the end of 5 years, most of the farmers involved in the project had fallen off because they said, here's the product, and there was no, this is how you use it, this is how you make use of it. And it took us a good 5 years to figure out how are we going to use this data, how are we going to make it applicable for what we do, how do we get a return on investment for the amount of time we put into using this information. So if you started off as a cost product, I don't think the uptake would be very large at all.
And Kenji, just changing it slightly, because you're a business that does take open access data, but then with the work you do, you're actually then you're charging and making a business out of providing other data sets to your customers. So is there an issue there about taking open access data but then making money out of it?
Yeah, open data is easy to access for everybody. So for business point of view, commercial data is more important. But the combination, commercial data and open data, is more important, I think.
Okay, I'm just going to pick one of the questions that's come through on the screen and just ask everybody this. And it's just a bit of an open question, so I'm going to look for somebody who wants to jump in with an answer. And it's where do your companies go to obtain Earth observation data and geospatial data to produce your goods and services? So where's the first place you go to, the obvious place you go to? Is there any way that you're familiar with?
Well, I'll start. It's perhaps repetitive of my answer a few minutes ago, and that is that the core source of data for the insurance industry are government programs providing data access for climate, weather, extreme events, both historical, contemporaneous with the event, and some research looking forward. It is fair to say that the raw data is certainly difficult for the insurance companies and these catastrophe modeling companies to use, so you really do need transformers of the data, including perhaps some of these companies here, really to help the data be usable. Otherwise, it's an overwhelming amount of data to be used.
Do you want to pick up that one, John?
Yeah, well, I mean, from a data standpoint, every day we download huge amounts of data. It's a wide range of arenas. Some of it government data, some of it in situ, historical. We also do loads of forecast work, very specific forecast work globally, looking at things by hour actually in certain situations. And so some of the data we pay for, and we pay quite a bit for, especially from Europe, but we need that data. And so it's a wide range of things, and it's really determined by the needs of our clients, what they're interested in getting, how we take that, integrate that into our software, and give them answers at the end of the day as to what they're doing that specific day, that specific week, or planning ahead for a quarter, for a season, whatever.
Jack?
Yes, my business is about software, desktop software, server software, and more recently we created something called a cloud online service. And there's respectively about 2 million desktop users, about 250,000 server users, but about 5 million cloud users. In this cloud, it's a global cloud, there are almost 13 million data sets. Where do these come from? 3 sources. First, our users are sharing their data openly so that users can help users. That's kind of fun watching it, because every day it just it's not Facebook or anything, but it's exponentially growing. The second is we've taken about 2,000 layers and created what we call the Living Atlas. So we buy all of DG's and Airbus's imagery, we feather it together kind of like a Google map, but for authoritative users. And then we build a topographic-based map for the planet based on shared information. And so we spend about $50 million preparing data that we give away to our users. So all these layers, demographic layers, we read in like the climate data as a service from NOAA and other sources. And connected to this cloud system are thousands of servers. Think of this as there's the cloud and then there's these connections to all these organizations that are serving the data. So I guess, John, the short answer is I search my catalog and I find data. Now, the last piece that's happening is in the marketplace, you can actually buy DG high-resolution data or Airbus high-resolution data or Planet or all these different commercial companies. So think about my 5 million users. They're not interested in finding the data. They hardly are interested in connecting the data as dial tone to their apps. They want it sort of automatic. So my work has really been about trying to figure out how to orchestrate a kind of Facebook for geographic knowledge. And through the good collaboration with Barb and her team at GEO, we have wired in many of the EO services supporting now multi-dimension data sets. So I can do dynamic things on anything from, every day we have the full download of Landsat or MODIS or now starting to work with Sentinel, bringing it in off the cloud. So my users, finding your own data, that's so 90s. They want to be able to connect in and use it right away. That's why I keep emphasizing this idea of open data is not enough. You have to serverize it into GIS ready to use stuff so that, I'll just say, like John can build it and build a business on top of that ecosystem without spending a hell of a lot of money. And this is happening in other places. I think in, what's the company, the real estate company, Zillow. Okay, they've taken the time and the money and invested in bringing all kinds of parcel data, land ownership data, and related layers underneath their application for consumers. And they charge for it through advertising. But I see as we move to this digital earth, there'll be this need for not only raw data services, but also people like Kenji and others that aggregate that data and turn it into information products. And at the high end, people like John that really build advisory services right into supply chain or into ag production. And then ultimately, people like Brad will just dial into it and use it and build their own analytic models because we're moving in that direction. So I see it as a step. We're at a very immature step in the evolution and creation of the nervous system, where everything is measured and served and used to guide, hopefully with greater understanding and intelligence, what humans are doing.
Thank you. I'm going to pick up another question on this, actually, because it hasn't got any likes yet, but I'm still going to use it because it ties up on that. And somebody's asked, what are the expectations of the private sector on the structure, abilities, functionalities of data dissemination and platforms? And you sort of touched on that, Jack, and saying the value is not in the data, the value is in the platform you go to that you can access data. And John said, my clients aren't worried about data, they're just worried about finding solutions and answers. So just generally, does any of the audience, the panel have any views about, what are those platform functionalities that you're looking for when you access data? It was interesting this morning, I think, with the public sector thing. There was an issue there that we didn't quite explore, that we have to get data in the same sorts of formats so we can use it. Otherwise, they're just groups of sets of data. So is that an issue for you, getting data in the right formats that you as businesses can use? I'll just pick up somebody else first and come back to you, Jack. Anyone want to, from the insurance sector, Frank?
Well, it's when I consulted with some of the companies we represent about this, they did talk about standardization as being particularly useful, that you've got sources of data across the public sector that are not standardized. And so I've mentioned NOAA and NASA, but you could go to the Army Corps of Engineers and other sources of information about infrastructure, hard infrastructure, green infrastructure. So the standardization of data would be a particularly positive development. But for us, the core answer to your question is, well, where's the source of the data? And the source of the data is the raw data that comes from government. that does need a transforming vehicle, such as Jack's company, to help it use that and apply it. And then the other transformer that's being used that I mentioned are these catastrophe modeling companies that are taking the raw data, and they are heavily staffed with scientists, natural scientists, to help transform that because the data is largely raw data.
It was interesting. I was at the American Meteorological Society annual meeting last year in New Orleans, and I was actually struck by how many meteorologists were employed in the business sector, giving talks about what they're doing. And it really struck me the power of putting meteorology, climate, into businesses. And clearly John's going to agree with that one. But it is that power of using data in different formats, I think, is really exciting. John?
Well, I think it really is driven by data. And so that is something that has changed in the last, late 90s, early 2000. Actually, a company, Enron was a big part of that. You know, Enron had their problems, but they had some really good people that worked at Enron. And when I was at Citigroup, I worked very closely with that group. They're kind of all over doing great things. But what happened around 2000, and then from that point on in oscillations, is that individuals that knew atmosphere, ocean interactions, and were really good quants, especially PhDs, everybody wanted them. You know, it's data-driven to be able to take data and do things with that. Where did it start? It started with the hedge funds. The big hedge funds out there, they will pay about anything to get an atmospheric scientist that has a really great quant background that can do correlations and things, and especially as more and more data came out. And then it's grown from there. So initially it was the hedge funds, probably because they had a lot of money, and then it's grown and grown to other entities. And now you're seeing overall companies, grain companies, the Cargills of the world, you know, they're beginning to hire bigger met firms. They've always had meteorologists, but they're hiring quants, and it's all data-driven, people doing things with data. It's the same thing that we're talking about, but that's where things have changed in the last 15 years. And it used to be that there were individuals out there that had those backgrounds, but now companies want that, and they want that in their company, not a consulting firm, but they want that in the company too.
Jack?
John, I have something to say that's, I don't know if all of you are aware of this concept of services, so I've been using the term quite a bit. But about 10 years ago, this became sort of invented. It's still being invented. The idea that, like in the 90s, if I wanted to have a database about geography, I'd get an Oracle database, I'd put all the data in one DBMS, all my layers. I would do like Franklin said, integrate all the data. Maybe I'd convert it from this format or that format, and then I'd have it in place, and then I could really work. That was a lot of work because people had to agree on consistent data models and standards for measurement, and when it was done, after all that work, it really did work because you had integrated data. You could overlay all the data sets and it was fine. But with the invention of services, the concept is basically I leave this data here in this database, sometimes it's even real time, this in this database, and hundreds of others all over the net, but I put a little piece of software right next to the data or the sensor network or the observational platform with data coming in. And I view it dynamically using REST services. And I view it with REST services as a map. So it geospatially views all of these heterogeneous data types, different sensors. I mean, we're not going to, I mean, the invention of observation platforms and sensors, we want to have it free and open, right? They don't have to rigidly follow one standard, but in this concept of services, I can have distributed services, Earth observation services, vector data services, IoT services, but I bring them together as a web map view. And then I can integrate the web maps analytically without ever consolidating the data. So I'm going on a technical rant here because I think it's so damn important to understand this concept. The big revolution of WebGIS is that data can be all over the place, and you view it and you integrate it dynamically. So you're doing dynamic modeling. So we've had to actually rewrite all the damn software because the algorithms that worked in the old client-server model didn't work. So now we're doing dynamic integration and modeling and analytics and interpretation. And we're just beginning to see that unravel. That means I have to have a portal to discover my distributed services. And people have to use, REST services to be able to make their data available. But just imagine, I'll be able to access all measurements on the planet and do it simply without this trouble of normalizing all the data is what we used to call it in database theory.
Okay, thank you.
If I could just add
Yeah.
one comment to this to give an example. I've mentioned these catastrophe modeling companies as the place where the transformation of the data into applications for insurance companies is done. So the largest of them is RMS, and I've got the numbers roughly right. Probably 2,000 employees. About 1,000 of them are people with advanced degrees in the natural sciences. So it doesn't surprise me that you would go to an AMS meeting and a lot of the presentations would be there, that the data is in such a state and the access is in such a way that you really do need professionals like that to help translate the data, not just data managers, but people to interpret the data as well.
Kenji, I'm just going to, finally on this issue. So are you thinking along the same lines as Jack is, that you don't need necessarily to put all the data in the same format? There are ways in which you can access data. And the reason I'm asking that question is because I think when I've been talking to a lot of the Earth observation community, there's been that sense of that the Earth observation community is not just about providing the data, they've got to develop the applications as well, then able to use it. But what I'm hearing is that's not necessarily true. The private sector can develop the applications. Obviously, GIS is one. So, Kenji, from your perspective, do you need data in all the same formats? Can you build a successful business as you have on a similar model to Jack's?
As Jack mentioned, if supply chain works well, it's not necessary all the format is same. For example, we are a value-added value-added products provider. We make value-added products GIS ready to use for end user or for consulting firm or some specific simulation tool providers. We usually make a joint project or supply chain for end user. We provide a 3D data set to consulting firm or simulation tool provider, and end user solve their business issue by this combination. So supply chain works well. Same format is not necessary.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to ask another question here off the screen, and I'm not sure anybody really meant what they said here, but we'll see. It's from Chris McGinty, and Chris asks, Brad is an example of a grassroots local user. Now, as Brad's business is growing grass, I hope that. Anyway, Brad is an example of a grassroots local user. Any ideas how to better identify similar potential local users, identify their needs, and teach them to use EO? Brad, how does this community talk to more people like you? What is it they need to find out?
I think if you have an idea at the very start is to engage with a group of farmers, probably a group of end users, whoever the end users were, and bring them in right at the very beginning. And then the product that you develop will be targeted specifically for their needs. And I think then that when you take it out into the marketplace, it will be adopted very quickly because it's suitable for that. I can give you an example of how I've gone about doing this. This season at home was, we could see it was going to be a really bad year in our area. And so I've publicly stood up and said that 2017 is going to be a really bad year where we are potentially the worst year we've had. And the media was saying, no, it's really good. And a fella came up to me and he said, I think you need to change your hashtag for your Twitter and call yourself Old Misery Guts because you're the only one that's saying things are bad. And then 2 months later, he came up with a couple of cartons of beer and he said, I really owe you one. better talk to me about how this works. And I think that's one really good way of getting end users and identifying, because they just come to you to find out more information. But you definitely engage your audience at the beginning.
I think you've touched on an important point, actually, connected back to the public sector panel, because somebody was asked a question about, I can't remember the exact question, but the answer was we need to get the data people into our projects at the design stage, that very early stage. You're actually saying the other way around, we need to be talking to the data people at their very early stage as well. So this is a collaborative process rather than I've done something, can you use it? Or I have a problem, can you help? There's a collaboration partnership there.
We've had research and development on our farm for over 30 years now. We've had researchers coming on the farm. By far, the three major projects that have done really well was where we had direct engagement with the people who came up with the idea, and we developed it as a team. Those projects have stood out far and above anything else and have been adopted far more widely than anything else we've been involved with.
John, I mean, in your business, that collaboration and partnering with data providers, does that happen?
It does happen. And really, that collaboration that you're doing, it really, again, comes down to the end user and the data that you want, and then exchange of information, between you and the end user and the data information. Because we have some groups working together where we have groups with the data providers we buy data from, the end user, and us. And we're working as a team together to get the end result, what they really want on the back end. So we keep that very individual or company individual as to we'll get the three entities and leave it there, and we'll work together in getting what the client wants at the end of the day. But we do collaborations here with many groups. Yeah, it depends upon the scope of the project. And then a lot of times once that project is done, it's more of a research project. Once their project is done, then it's kind of done. If they have what they need at that time, then we're done with the project. We go on.
John, I run a user group. We started this in 1980. We'd been working for 10 years on project by projects. And in 1980, we had 11 users of our software come. And it was the most scary meeting I've ever had, because I asked them basically, what do you think about our software? And our software was really bad. It was kind of homemade software. And they rank ordered what they wanted me to do. And it was humiliating. I had to sort of get off my I really know what I'm doing position and listen to them. And at that time, Esri changed from a services company to a products company. And it was driven by the users. So today we have like 18,000 users come together for a week, and they hit on us, they vote. We used to give them all $100, and we'd add up all the money, what they wanted us to spend on, and it became completely user-driven. And it's very paralyzing to get in front of users and really show them what you've been doing, and then have them, honest to God, give you real criticism, and you're not so smart anymore. So I run my business based on lots of questions and back and forth. The life cycle of software is much faster than the life cycle of putting up a bird. I used to think about NASA, they would design these sensors, put them up, and then a few years later, well, did it work out or not? Let's get some feedback, or let's get some people engaged in it. The life cycle of sensor development and feedback is tough. And so somehow connecting the EO community, and I know this is hard, but the EO community with the designers of the sensors with frequency may be very valuable. It's like go down to Brad and talk to him about soil moisture, and how do we capture soil moisture 3 meters deep, or what is it that we really, what's needed and wanted. That's what a user group really provides you, and it requires humility. I will simply say that, speaking. I mean, you guys are my colleagues, like I said before. What can I share of my 50 years doing this with you that might help? One of them is figure out what's needed and wanted first, and then be supportive of serve somebody, figure out who you're going to serve. And it isn't just the sort of big picture thing. You focus on that community and then do it and be driven by it and be humble enough to be able to keep evolving what you're doing. That would be one suggestion.
I'm sorry, I'm going to ask a very different question now, and it's something that came up in a conversation I had with Brad. And I want to ask this question because I want the audience to realize data has other uses that may not be immediately obvious. And what Brad told me yesterday was Earth observation data gave him the social license to operate his farm because farming comes under criticism. Do you want to pick that up, Brad?
Yeah, sure. Look, every year we have groups of university students, final year ag students come onto the farm, and that's fine because they talk the same language as us and we're all on the same page. So their questions are very hard, but we can deal with that. And we had a group of schoolgirls, I think they were about 15, from a school in Perth, never been on a farm before and never been out of the city, part of Rabobank's farm exchange program. And so we had 20 of these girls turn up, and one of the questions that really struck me was, they were looking at this livestock, and they love livestock, and they said, how do you know that those sheep out there have enough to eat every day? Because if you can't tell me, I'll become a vegetarian. So, okay, right, that's pretty good. So we went into the office. I said, come into the office and we'll have a look. And I pulled up all of the remote sensing data we'd used, explained to them how we convert all of our energy sources into megajoules, how we plan out the accumulation of biomass, how we work on the crop rotation, the pasture rotations to make sure they always had fresh feed, how we knew that every day the animal had plenty to eat. But not only that, we knew that 3 months out we would have enough feed for all those animals. So they were constantly being fed for the next 3 months. We had plenty of time to react to seasonal changes. And we ran through the whole lot. And I said, well, here's a login to my satellite data. Log in at any time that you like. And if you have a concern, call me and talk to me about what's happening on my farm. And they went, that's good. Yep, I'm happy with that. And I think that's really important that there is a disconnect between farmers and consumers. And sometimes we have to be much more upfront about this is how we do. We do our absolute very best to ensure that the animals are properly fed and properly looked after. And you can watch what I'm doing. I don't really mind. And yeah, it's been really valuable for us.
I mean, I can think of other industries, particularly some operating in developing countries, some of the natural resource extraction industries would come under lots of criticism for social license to operate. So do you think those are industries as well that can actually potentially think about how they use Earth observational data to demonstrate, hopefully, they are running their operations correctly? Is that something you would see? John, do you see any evidence of businesses seeing using good, credible data enables me to demonstrate I'm a well-run business to the wider world?
Oh, I don't think there's any question about that as to, and again, it comes down to, with any business, there's competition within business sectors. So if you have a company, well, the beer example, I hate to keep using the beer example, but the beer example from Feb 15, when all these companies lost millions, they talk. And so they knew that one company was talking to us, company in St. Louis, Missouri. So they were talking with us. They talked to a couple of other beer companies out there, and within 1 month, we had all the three majors in the nation. And then we expanded to Europe. And so if business realize that they're doing, others are doing something that's going to improve their bottom line, in this case, they didn't want to lose $18 million of beer in 2.5 weeks. If others are doing that, they're going to do that. So I think it comes down to that. And I think it comes down to competition. If they find out that another company in their sector is doing that, they're going to rapidly look into it. The difference in supply chain logistics is that no one had done that before. They just took it, which surprised the heck out of us. They would just take the weather and, we're going to lose this amount, every winter on average. Well, you don't have to do that. And then they came to us and, well, can you look out for the next week or two and look at specific temperatures on our routes? We'll go, of course we can. They had never even thought that way. This is just a couple of years ago. It's pretty amazing. And then within 1 month, we had all three majors in the country. But a lot of it comes down to competition and, You'll find out eventually if a company is doing that, and if it's improving their bottom line, the other company is going to look at it very quickly. And I think that's it. That's at large scales like this. It's at small scales too. Farmer to farmer, I think.
So is one of the take-home messages then for the Earth observation community out here that finding those success stories and publishing them as stories, not publishing them as scientific peer-reviewed pieces, but actually success stories that the media can pick up on, that's actually a way in which others pick up the data and the need for it.
And of course, nowadays with Twitter, I mean, everyone's into Twitter. You know, you have a hashtag on a company, on a sector, and that comes through. And believe me, somebody sees that, and they'll look at that, and they will be the next one to look into it. Oh, there's no question.
I think it's almost natural, you know, private sector competitive marketplace. You know, you get the advantage, so word spreads very fast. That's something that the private sector can do very well, that the government can learn actually from, is just that sort of a private sector competitive marketplace. It occurs to me, John, when you were talking, that you're in the understanding business. And then I thought, oh, well, maybe all of you are in the understanding business. I mean, what we're selling is understanding. Yeah. One of my dear friends, Richard Saul Werman, once said, understanding precedes action. I just love that phrase. Understanding precedes action. So all the original data collection, all the analytics, the putting it into applications is all about creating a stack of understanding. You know, that's anyway, I just...
And proving it too.
Well, it has to understand, you mean no false news or something like that? I mean,
Exactly.
yeah, I mean, understanding needs to be credible. But I think if looking out at so many of you, you're in the understanding business, I know, Stuart. And I mean, I look right across the audience. I know that you're all about trying to create a better understanding on the planet. And we are, whether, you know, John, this public versus private thing, actually there's lots of organizations. I see some public agencies working with other public agencies or not working, or public agencies working with private agencies or university agencies. They're all just organizations trying to collaborate. So I don't think you should make a lot about public-private partnerships. It's really more organizational partnerships and figuring out the culture that allows us all to work in a collaborative environment to create this understanding platform. I mean, that's the big vision, and I'd just say, I'm saying it, but it could be coming out of Barb Ryan's mouth. I mean, she's, thank you, Barb, by the way. Let's give her a hand because she's brought us together. I mean, she's amazing.
Thanks.
I was going to offer a comment that's maybe counterintuitive. If you assume in the insurance sector that the price that is charged is the communication of risk, a risk assessment to the consumer. So you drive a BMW, the insurance is going to cost more than if you drive a 10-year-old Honda Civic because the cost of repair or replacement is more. So it's a signal, if you will, to the community. But insurance rates are highly regulated. And we run into this problem all the time where in the regulatory community there is this desire to make certain that things are affordable. And so the data analytics around risk pricing get into that political environment of, well, what can people afford? Completely fair point, of course, versus what that risk signal is. So it gets muted in some context when it shouldn't. So your question was about socializing the data. It's interesting in our sector where you have a regulated industry and regulated pricing where the socialization of the risk assessment gets muted. The flood insurance program that I've mentioned a couple of times is a good example of that, where in high-risk areas, notably in the Gulf and in Florida, the risk premiums are heavily subsidized in many ways because of the desire of the political process to make flood insurance affordable, when in fact there ought to be a full understanding of what the risk is, that where people live and where they choose to live and what local communities do about land use planning or allowing people to build in these high-risk areas. The data would show them something different than what the public is being charged in that case.
I'm going to change this tone this a bit and see if we can elicit some questions directly from the audience. I mean, I have the questions on the screens here as well, but does anybody like to put their hand up and ask a specific question? Can you just state your name and just let everybody know who you are? I'm sure everybody does, but...
I have a question with regards to the panel. Here in the audience are the representatives of GEO, the ones who are doing everything to make data available, interoperable. What is the key message you want to give to us with regards to what we are doing? Is do more, do things differently? Because you are the transformers, as the word was mentioned several times, you're the service provider. So is there any message you would like to give to us? That's one question. And my second question, I've used a little bit my time, is I don't see enough in other parts of the world businesses, transformers getting out of, getting off the ground and doing the work what these companies are doing. We have been putting hundreds of millions into collecting the data and making it operable, but we are not harvesting them at all. Perhaps in the United States in certain parts, but I think across the globe, we are not at all seeing the businesses coming out of these data. So what is the messages there? What can we do, or should we do anything from the public administration side to encourage these transformers, these services, these new business concepts to get off the ground? Or should we say, no, you know, we stick to just generating the data and then let the market do whatever the market wants to do? But I don't see the market develop in certain parts of this globe.
Okay, thank you for that. So just thinking about the first question, just if there's a key message from each of you to this audience, which is it is the world's Earth observation community, your one chance to tell them exactly what you think. Brad?
I think you should start that in.
Okay, I'll start this. Yeah, you're Australian, you'll be too direct. Frank?
Well, the first thought that crossed my mind was really research. Is that in a changing climate environment, that the data that we see coming out of the community and certainly out of government programs really we've improved in value to the extent that the community can give forward-looking assessment of that. If the past isn't prologue with respect to rainstorms, wind, that kind of thing, at least in our sector, we would benefit from the insights associated with the analysis and forward-looking research about the data.
Kenji?
We are talking about a platform, and I'm not sure GEO should make a platform, but I think GEO's current position is to prepare database, free database with open and free policy. But I expect GEO will also encourage to prepare platform. It's not that GEO should prepare cloud itself. It's just that GEO encourage some other parties to prepare cloud regardless public or private.
Thank you. Jack?
I really don't know. I mean, there's some policy things that GEO could do, and then there's technical initiatives. The policy things, I guess, are reinforcing what Kenji said, open data, certainly there. And also continuing these kind of meetings, because we learn from each other. Aren't you guys learning from your colleagues? I mean, this is really important. I think having educational programs that teach us what each other is doing so we're not living in our own stovepipes is so very important. So that would be the second under policy. On the technology side, again, I hope I was able to communicate that I think the observation is not enough. It's providing a kind of generic service out that other people can capitalize on. In that sense, I agree with Kenji. We don't want to build another platform as much as we want to have a social platform that's open and standards-based that exploitation can happen on top of. Look, you and I, all of us, experienced the transformation of not being lost anymore. You remember? In 2000, we would go to a foreign city, we would be lost. But Google integrating GPS and imagery remote sensing, an earth science platform, means that I can go to any place on the planet, and no longer be lost. And that was transformational. How did that happen? It happened through a very simple app, and it kind of bounced around in the marketplace, and then it came alive. It changed the world. We're no longer lost. So what are those innovations by young transformers that we need to create? Because, in fact, we're very lost. I mean, the world is really lost. The arrows are going in the wrong direction. What are those innovative transformers that can lay on top of all of your good work that will get us to wake up, to understand what the hell we are doing and change the pattern? And that's my hope. So framing what the GEOS community does is always done in that framework. How can we make stuff available, easy for innovators to take advantage of? Maybe that's my answer.
John.
I would agree with everybody. I would make a special comment from what Frank said, is that, data unto itself has value, but not the kind of value that it has when it's applied to things happening. And those things happening are what the end users want. And so the research end of things, I think that's a fascinating, area to go into. And, taking the data and doing things with that data, especially on the macro scale. I mean, it's a big organization. Start with the, low-hanging fruit, the biggest things out there. But I would say research and being able to begin to apply that data for things for our globe. That'd be a great starting point.
Brad?
Okay, I'm going to tackle this quite simply. I think if you engage with the industry a lot more from an ag point of view, I think you'd be surprised how interested they are in what you all do. And here's a little tip. When you engage with them, just for the first week or two, take the acronyms out. I was sitting in a thing yesterday, and there were more acronyms on the board than there were full words. And in agriculture, a lot of the acronyms you were using mean entirely different things, so it was pretty difficult to figure out what was going on. Just give them a little bit of time, they'll be speaking the same language, but I think you have to break that barrier down as well. But yeah, I think you'd be richly rewarded if you engage and ask them what are the problems, got them to throw problems to you, and it'll be plain as day. You might just say, oh, well, I didn't even think that was an issue. And I've come across this before when I've talked to people in this field, and I've given them a list of things that I think are impossible to do. And they said, well, they've all been done. You just don't know about it. And I think that's a big gap.
So, John, I was going to add something to my earlier comment. If you would take out your mobile device, for those of you that aren't already using your mobile device to check your emails, you would see on there apps that have disintermediated an extraordinary number of commercial sectors. I guess part of the answer I would give to you is that to the extent that the community can develop either a venue, if you will, and I'll cite an example, for weather, climate entrepreneurs, people that are seeking to provide technology approaches to deal with society's issues, and people that are really knowledgeable about the data and the application of the data. So there is a terrific new initiative in Asheville, North Carolina called the Collider, or the Climate Collider, I think is what it's called. And it really is it's a forum for people seeking to provide data applications to the commercial sector. And there are a whole variety of people working there, many of whom were with NOAA. They know the data, they know the applications of the data, and they're seeking to find commercial applications. So if I were to supplement my earlier answer, would be perhaps that kind of prototype, if you will, of a place that people can come together who are seeking to commercialize the data and work with each other in a collaborative manner. It might be an interesting thing to think about in other parts of the world, where at least in the US there is an existing such forum.
Thank you for the plug to the Collider, Frank. Frank doesn't know this, but we're a founder member of the Collider, and we have an office base in there, so thanks for the plug. I'm going to take this opportunity, I'm going to respond to a question. I know that I'm the moderator, but I'm going to respond to this. And to me, the thing to do is don't go to the wider world and say, I have all this data, it must be useful, what can you use it for? Just forget that. Go to the outside world and say, what's your problem? And then see if you might have data that helps. It's twist it round the other way, because I think as Jon says, his clients don't care or know what the data is. They just want to solve problems, and that's how they think. So just a plea on that. I'm conscious that other people have been trying to ask questions, so I'm going to go to the Republic of China and ask them.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, just you have mentioned we had to go out and ask the people what issue you have. So if I look into the issues, first looking into the panels, we found that in the developed world, the business approach and the market mechanism is very much developed. Yet, for the developing countries, this sector is still burgeoning. So, in your views, how business sectors should be able to help the RD sectors bridging the users in this case? This is the first part of the question. Second part of the question, since developing world, there are lots of business people, entrepreneurs like you, would like to see a piece of cake of $1 billion of opportunities. How would you think that the government should do, or in other words, how this business sector should ask government support, whether in terms of finance, technology, market, or other policy mechanism? So according to your experience, we wish that you might give some lights and share some experiences in this respect. Thank you.
Thank you.
John, I have
Frank.
a response, a comment to that. These are both new initiatives, so take it in the spirit of that. But a number of insurance companies have pooled together in something that I think is called Blue Marble, but it's essentially a micro-insurance product focusing on the developing world and people that do not have the resources that you have in countries like the United States to buy insurance, but to focus on the immediate needs of people in developing countries where insurance is not a traditional product or not generally available. So it's a micro-insurance product, and Blue Marble is the initiative that the global insurance industry is doing. And I suspect if you Google Blue Marble, they will come right up. The second is one that is clearly just taking off. It's called the Insurance Development Forum. It is sponsored by a dozen of the major insurance companies in the world, Lloyd's of London, Munich Reinsurance, Swiss Reinsurance, companies like that. And they are seeking to identify issues in developing countries in the spirit of developing the economies in a way that, frankly, that the insurance markets can develop there. And if you have an interest in contacting them, I would be glad to put you in touch with the lead people for the Insurance Development Forum. It's an interesting initiative by the industry, recognizing that in too many developing countries, you don't have an established insurance market at all. The industry would benefit over time by an insurance market that develops, but you've really got to put seed money into developing that. So those are the two I would mention as examples that in our sector are looking at weather and climate and looking at the insurance needs in developing countries.
Brad, I'm going to turn to you on this one because, I mean, you're an example of research and development working with business. You're living proof of how it works with the pilot project you were doing. So do you see that as being one of the key way forwards, actually the business sector working with R&D, with universities, with governments on joint projects?
Oh, absolutely. That's about the only R&D we do now, is direct with universities and industry and ourselves. And we create not a linear timeline, so it's a 3-year project. It's very important not to have a linear and a goal at the end. You review it every 6 months, and if you need to change direction, and remember what you've learned on the way. And that way you'll come up with because quite often the product that you're aiming for is not the one that you end up proving that's useful. So be flexible and involve the main players in the industry and the whole chain.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody else would like to comment on that one? Okay, I'm going to move to the next question. I think there was a question from WHO. I think it's WHO. Are they here? My scribe said it was WHO. Yes, okay, sorry, apologies.
No problem. I think, first of all, thank you very much for this fantastic panel. I think this is really excellent. There are, if you were to segment the markets in terms of the country perspective, there are different line ministries that are set up to work with space agencies. And health sector, the ministries of health is one of the line ministries, which have, I think they can benefit extraordinarily this GEO, especially the Earth observation as well as remote sensing data for advancing public health. And I think, there is no study yet, but I think it's probably a multi-billion-dollar industry in various ways, insofar as how near real-time or completely serviced full-cycle data that can be available at the level of on the ground, insofar as sub-national level is concerned, like at the level of a village or the block level, for various purposes, including monitoring various health conditions. Where do you think the ministries of health and perhaps the space agencies that are in those countries work together to have a common policy mandate that they can put in place at the level of a parliament, where they don't need to have just a one-off MOUs for every time they need to work on something, but a policy document that they can actually endorse and have it as a regular routine legal process that will allow them, in other words, have a mandate that will implicitly allow ministries of health to work with space agencies and also commercial enterprises to develop in that umbrella. I think this is an extraordinary chance for us to kind of draft such a document and push it through forward, and other line ministries can perhaps go forward. From WHO side, I think this is a showstopper, if you will, because there is no mandate in countries, so they cannot really go forward, and there are no interpretations that they can make out of how to work with space agencies in the public health space. So how do you see, what is your advice as to what are the key critical policy advice that you would want to give insofar as having the policy-enabled environment be available for you to take this market and grow in each of these countries to benefit health agenda?
Okay, thank you. Does anybody have any knowledge or background of the health sector particularly?
I feel particularly unqualified, but I will speak anyway. I think in the United States that the connection between climate change and health risk is not fully appreciated or understood. So to the extent that better knowledge or understanding of climate-related diseases or health risks could be made more of a public value, if you will, then you'll see government programs that would support research. So I suspect we all feel, well, I shouldn't speak for the others, unqualified to talk about what our space agency should be doing that. I would point you to the Harvard School of Public Health, which has a couple of people there who have done just excellent research and published articles about the health risk associated with climate change. So I realize I'm on the edge of our topic here about data, but I do think that kind of forward-looking assessment of climate risk in the health sector perhaps can change the emphasis that government places on research in that area.
One comment I can make on that actually is, because Frank allows me now, because he mentioned the Collider. I know at the Collider in Asheville, North Carolina, there's a small company that is actually taking the data from the National Center for Environmental Information and predicting dengue in the US, and it's a live, real-time process. This is a very small company using data that's available, should produce this information, so it can happen. But there's no relationship with the government here at all. That's just an entrepreneurial view of the world. I think one thing just to comment on, I mean, I don't know what's going on in Australia or in Japan, and perhaps Kenji, perhaps you can advise, but I know in some other countries, there's a very close research innovation process between university, government, and business. And it's that level of collaboration that perhaps the WHO perhaps thinks might be useful in other countries. In Japan, Kenji, do you have that close relationship that allows these mandates to be created?
Yeah, Japanese government take an initiative to collaborate these three parties, and thanks to their activity, we can make a new value-added product or something like that.
I'm going to move on. I'm sorry we're making these answers pretty short, and all of these could deserve a couple of hours each, I think. I think the delegation from Finland wished to answer a question. I can't. Okay, sorry.
Yeah, thank you very much for a good discussion until now. And now I have a very, I think, Jack, you brought up this navigation example of how could we follow that. And I think that is an example that we have so many opportunities of applications, and we are just not getting as many of them developed to the stage where it will be tested if it will change the world. And well, as a Finnish delegate to some of the program committees in European public funding, I can see that there's much more interest for let's say, getting funding to do this development. So I'm wondering, how do you see that the private investment scene could be more kind of like active in also helping these to become the app level test? So it's a risky investment, I'm sure, but that I think we need some kind of mechanism to how to get that better. So maybe you have ideas.
Do you want to start, Jack?
Yeah, in our country we have a lot of venture capital. Billions is being spent on so-called new innovations, and particularly in the area of machine learning. Right now it's the big fad and the blah, 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 blah. In Europe, you have similar sorts of forces and also strong government funding to do startup sorts of work. And I have nothing against that, except that sometimes big money and big ideas get in the way of doing genuine and real things. The way I started Esri was with $1,100, and I never borrowed money. That means I had to pay close attention to people like Brad all the time. Because when they said, this is what I need to be able to do my work better, I had to listen very carefully. And I wasn't in outer space, you know, wearing a certain kind of shoes or a certain kind of PowerPoint architecture or trying to look good for venture capital. My investors were my end users. So this startup culture, and I think this is true, responding to our colleague from China, in the developing country as well as in developed countries, genuine focus on what's needed and wanted is what we need to build as a culture in our young innovators, not chasing money or being bought out by venture capital, so that they stay true to their real passion and follow that. That's where real innovation comes from, I think. But we're so, I'm being a little cynical here, but we're kind of mixed up in this sort of chasing money, chasing venture, chasing incubators, chasing startups. It's created a whole coloring of true innovation. You know, it just destroys so many young people and their passion to really do something great. So I'm speaking off tone here. But I would like to return to the question that our colleague from China said, which how do you do something in developing countries? What I am doing, I'll simply share that, is I'm spending millions of dollars on investing in universities in Africa. So I picked 100 top universities, getting our tools, getting our training, building the next generation. And then investing in businesses, for example, in Africa, not trying to be an outsider doing good. No, trying to start people that look after businesses that look after utilities in Kenya or look after farming in Rwanda. New businesses that are owned by Africans in this case, not, and they are sensitive enough, they seem to be sensitive enough to be able to look at genuine stuff, not sort of big flying programs from national government. No, those usually fail. But investing in real people doing real things that are focused on real problems, I think is the way that we get out of this problem that we're having. And so, I don't know if that helps you. And they are knowledgeable, of course, or we teach them how to use Earth science or Earth observation or any other kind of data.
I'm going to move on because I know there's a question from USA, and I can't see where the USA delegation is.
Right here, sir.
Sorry.
Yes, sir. Thank you, John and Frank, for mentioning the Collider example. It's a 501c3 nonprofit devoted to developing solutions for weather and climate problems. And we have here some of the key leaders. If anyone in the audience is interested in learning more about it, come to us during the break, and we'd be happy to share with you what we feel is a success as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think we're literally just dead on time again. So I'm going to, again, first of all, thank my panel. It's made my life incredibly easy. Thank you very much, guys. Really appreciate it. Thank you very much to the audience for the great questions. I hope you've had got something out of it. Thank you.